November 24, 1971, Thanksgiving Eve. While millions of Americans prepared for holiday celebrations, a nondescript man in a dark business suit handed a flight attendant a simple note. The message would trigger the only unsolved case of air piracy in United States commercial aviation history. Within hours, this quiet passenger would extort $200,000 in ransom, parachute into the darkness over the Pacific Northwest wilderness, and vanish completely. Despite one of the most intensive FBI investigations ever conducted, examining over 800 suspects across 45 years, the man who became known as D.B. Cooper remains a ghost. His identity, his fate, and the location of most of his ransom money continue to elude investigators more than 5 decades later. This is the story of the perfect crime that changed aviation security forever. Part 1. The Golden Age of Hijacking. To understand the audacity of what occurred on Northwest Orient Flight 305, we must first examine the context of early 1970s aviation. The years between 1968 and 1973 witnessed such a surge in aircraft hijackings that historians dubbed this period the Golden Age of Hijacking. During this 5-year span, over 305 hijacking incidents occurred worldwide. The phenomenon had become so commonplace that some airlines began factoring hijacking delays into their scheduling. In 1971 alone, the year of Cooper's hijacking, multiple aircraft were commandeered, though the number had decreased slightly from the peak year of 1969. The frequency of these incidents had created a strange atmosphere of resignation among aviation authorities and passengers alike. Security measures at airports remained remarkably lax by modern standards. No metal detectors scanned passengers before boarding. No identification checks verified travelers' identities. No luggage inspections examined what passengers carried onto planes. Anyone with cash could purchase a ticket under any name and walk directly onto an aircraft, carrying virtually anything they wished. This security vacuum made commercial aviation vulnerable to exploitation. Most hijackers during this era shared similar profiles. They typically demanded to be flown to Cuba, seeking asylum from American authorities. Others harbored political motivations, hoping to use their captive aircraft as platforms for airing grievances. The pattern had become so predictable that airlines developed informal protocols for dealing with hijackers. Comply with demands. Keep passengers calm. Land safely at the requested destination. Let authorities handle the situation on the ground. Northwest Orient Airlines, the carrier involved in Cooper's hijacking, operated as one of America's major airlines during this period. The company had been founded in 1926 and maintained a strong presence in the Pacific Northwest region, where it served as a crucial transportation link connecting cities throughout Oregon and Washington. The airline's Flight 305 represented a routine service, a brief 30-minute hop from Portland International Airport to Seattle-Tacoma International Airport that passengers and crew had completed countless times without incident. The Boeing 727 aircraft used for Flight 305 embodied the cutting-edge aviation technology of its era. Boeing had designed the 727 specifically to operate at smaller airports, incorporating features that provided independence from ground facilities. The most distinctive of these features was the built-in rear air stair located in the underbelly of the aircraft. This design element allowed passengers to board and deplane without requiring external stairs or jetways. The 727's rear air stair could be operated from inside the cabin using a simple switch mechanism, making it convenient for rapid boarding and deplaning at airports with limited ground equipment. This rear air stair feature, while practical for everyday operations, contained a critical vulnerability that Boeing's engineers had never fully considered. The stairs could be lowered during flight. The cabin door could be opened while the aircraft was airborne, provided the plane was not pressurized. This design characteristic would prove central to the events that unfolded on November 24, 1971. Part 2. A nondescript man named Dan Cooper. The morning of November 24, 1971, dawned cold and overcast in Portland, Oregon. At Portland International Airport, travelers bustled through the terminal, eager to reach their destinations before Thanksgiving. Among the crowd, one man moved with quiet purpose. Witnesses later described him as entirely unremarkable, the kind of person who could disappear into any crowd without leaving a lasting impression. This man approached the Northwest Orient Airlines ticket counter carrying a black attaché case. He wore a dark business suit, a white dress shirt, and a narrow black clip-on tie. His appearance suggested a typical businessman of the era, conservative and professional. He paid cash for a one-way ticket to Seattle, handing over $20 for the short flight. The ticket agent processed his purchase without incident, recording the name he provided on the reservation: Dan Cooper. The name Dan Cooper would later become one of the most famous aliases in American criminal history, though through a quirk of journalistic error, history would remember him by a different name entirely. During the subsequent investigation, a reporter searching through police records encountered a man named D.B. Cooper, who had been briefly considered and cleared as a suspect. The reporter mistakenly conflated this individual with the hijacker's alias. When other news outlets republished this error, the name D.B. Cooper stuck in the public consciousness, overshadowing the actual alias the hijacker had used. Physical descriptions of Dan Cooper provided by multiple witnesses created the first composite pictures of the hijacker. The FBI's official description characterized him as a white male standing between 5 feet 10 inches and 6 feet tall, weighing approximately 170 to 175 pounds. Witnesses estimated his age as mid-40s, though assessments varied. His complexion appeared olive-toned. He had brown eyes and dark hair styled in a conventional manner with a part on the left side. He wore no distinctive jewelry or accessories that might aid identification. His brown shoes and black raincoat completed an outfit that screamed anonymity. Cooper carried 2 items aboard the aircraft: his black attaché case and a plain brown paper bag. Neither item raised suspicion among airline staff or fellow passengers. Both were commonplace accessories for business travelers of the era. Northwest Orient Flight 305 was scheduled to depart at 2:50 p.m. Pacific Time on November 24, 1971. The Boeing 727-100, registered as N467 US, would carry 36 passengers and 6 crew members on this routine flight. The flight crew consisted of Captain William Scott, First Officer William Radotzak, Flight Engineer Harold Anderson, and 3 flight attendants: Florence Schaffner, Tina Mucklow, and Alice Hancock. None of them could have anticipated that this ordinary Wednesday afternoon flight would become one of the most analyzed air journeys in aviation history. Cooper selected seat 18E in the last row of the rear cabin. This position would have provided him with strategic advantages, though whether he consciously recognized these tactical benefits remains unknown. The rearmost seat allowed him to observe all passenger and crew activity in front of him. It minimized the possibility of being approached or surprised from behind. It positioned him closest to the rear air stair he would later use for his escape, and it made him less conspicuous to other passengers, who naturally faced forward during flight. From what investigators could piece together, these factors suggest someone who understood basic tactical positioning, though this remains inference rather than established fact. After settling into his seat, Cooper ordered a drink from flight attendant Florence Schaffner, bourbon and 7-Up. He lit a cigarette, Raleigh Filter brand, and appeared relaxed and comfortable. Schaffner later recalled that nothing about Cooper's demeanor suggested nervousness or agitation. He seemed like any other business traveler preparing for a short flight. Part 3. The note. Shortly after Flight 305 took off from Portland at approximately 2:50 p.m., Dan Cooper initiated his plan. He summoned Florence Schaffner and handed her a note. Flight attendants in 1971 regularly received notes from male passengers attempting to flirt or request phone numbers. Schaffner initially assumed Cooper's note represented another unwanted romantic advance. She tucked the note into her pocket without reading it and moved to continue her duties. Cooper called her back. His voice remained calm and measured as he instructed her to read the note. Schaffner retrieved the paper and read the message that would change everything. The note stated simply, "I have a bomb in my briefcase. I want you to sit next to me." Schaffner sat down beside Cooper, who proceeded to open his black attaché case just enough for her to glimpse inside. She observed a mass of wires, red cylindrical objects that resembled dynamite sticks, and what appeared to be a battery. The visual evidence seemed to confirm the threat written in the note. Cooper calmly explained his demands. He wanted $200,000 in cash, specifically in $20 bills. He wanted 4 parachutes delivered to the aircraft, and he wanted these items ready when the plane landed in Seattle. Schaffner kept her composure despite the shock of the situation. Cooper instructed her to write down his demands and take them to the cockpit. She complied, informing Captain Scott of the hijacking in progress. Scott immediately contacted Northwest Orient Operations and Air Traffic Control, setting in motion a carefully coordinated response. The demands Cooper made suggest careful planning and forethought. By requesting 4 parachutes rather than just 1 or 2, he appears to have created the impression that he might force hostages to jump with him. Based on what we know about the investigation, this could imply strategic thinking. If officials believed Cooper might require crew members or passengers to use the parachutes, they would be compelled to supply functional, reliable gear rather than risk sabotaging equipment that innocent people might use. The amount of cash requested represented a substantial but manageable sum for the airline and law enforcement to gather on short notice. In 1971, $200,000 equated to approximately $1.6 million in 2024 currency. The ransom was significant enough to make the crime worthwhile for the hijacker, yet not so enormous that authorities could not quickly assemble the funds. With the hijacker's demands communicated to authorities on the ground, Flight 305 entered a holding pattern over Puget Sound. The flight, normally a brief 30-minute journey, would now circle Seattle for approximately 2 hours, while officials scrambled to meet Cooper's requirements. During this extended flight time, Cooper remained in his seat, displaying no signs of anxiety or agitation. He ordered another bourbon and 7-Up. He engaged in brief, polite conversation with flight attendant Tina Mucklow, who stayed near him as instructed. He even interacted briefly with another passenger, offering a cigarette in a gesture that seemed almost cordial. Mucklow later recalled that Cooper seemed familiar with the local area. He mentioned knowing about McCoy Air Force Base and correctly identified Tacoma when he glimpsed the city through the aircraft window. Based on these observations, investigators theorized that Cooper likely had spent time in the Pacific Northwest, possessed aviation knowledge, or both, though such details could also reflect research conducted before the hijacking. During the circling period, passengers remained unaware of the hijacking taking place at the back of the aircraft. The crew informed them that a mechanical issue required additional time before landing. Most passengers accepted this explanation without alarm, reading magazines or engaging in conversation to pass the time. The 36 people seated in front of Cooper had no idea they were hostages in a developing crisis. Part 4. Meeting the demands. On the ground in Seattle, a coordinated response unfolded with remarkable speed. Northwest Orient Airlines President Donald Nyrop authorized payment of the $200,000 ransom without hesitation. The FBI mobilized immediately, though their involvement remained necessarily limited during the in-flight phase of the incident. The Bureau's priority focused on gathering the demanded items and ensuring passenger safety. Assembling $200,000 in $20 bills on short notice presented logistical challenges. Banks in Seattle cooperated fully, pulling cash from their vaults to meet the requirement. FBI agents carefully recorded the serial numbers of every bill before packaging the money. This painstaking documentation process would provide investigators with a crucial tool for tracking the ransom money if it ever entered circulation. The serial numbers were distributed to financial institutions, casinos, racetracks, and businesses nationwide, creating a vast network of potential detection points. The ransom money was packaged in a canvas bank bag, the bills arranged in specific bundles secured with rubber bands. The total weight of 10,000 $20 bills came to approximately 21 pounds, creating a manageable but substantial package for Cooper to transport. Obtaining the 4 parachutes required more complex coordination. Cooper had specified 2 main backpack parachutes and 2 reserve chest-mounted parachutes. Local pilot Norman Hayden supplied the 2 main parachutes from his personal equipment. A Seattle skydiving school provided the 2 reserve parachutes. One of the reserve parachutes supplied was a training chute that had been sewn shut for instructional use. The inclusion of this non-functional parachute would later become a subject of debate among investigators, as it suggested Cooper might have lacked the expertise to identify a sabotaged chute. A truly experienced skydiver would have immediately recognized the sewn-shut reserve as unusable. The parachutes were packed by Earl Cossey, a professional parachute rigger with extensive experience. Cossey described the main parachutes as emergency bailout models rather than sport skydiving chutes. These bailout parachutes prioritized reliability and ease of deployment over maneuverability or soft landings. They were designed for emergency situations where simply getting safely to the ground mattered more than landing precision. By approximately 5:24 p.m. Pacific Time, Captain Scott received confirmation that the ransom and parachutes had been assembled and were ready for delivery. He relayed this information to Cooper, who approved the landing. At 5:46 p.m., Flight 305 touched down at Seattle-Tacoma International Airport after nearly 3 hours in the air. Cooper directed the crew to taxi to an isolated section of the tarmac, away from the main terminal and other aircraft. He wanted the plane positioned in a dimly lit area where ground personnel could approach without being observed by large crowds or creating opportunities for law enforcement intervention. These instructions demonstrated Cooper's careful attention to controlling the situation and minimizing risks to his escape plan. Al Lee, Northwest Orient's operations manager at Seattle-Tacoma Airport, was designated as the sole person authorized to approach the aircraft. Lee changed into civilian clothing to avoid being mistaken for law enforcement. He carried the ransom money and parachutes to the plane's rear door, where flight attendant Tina Mucklow retrieved them. Mucklow made multiple trips between the door and Cooper's seat, first bringing the money bag and then returning for the parachutes. Cooper examined the contents carefully. He inspected the cash, though he did not count it meticulously. He checked the parachutes, evaluating their condition and suitability. The manner of his examination suggested some familiarity with parachuting equipment to the crew members who observed him, though his failure to notice the sewn-shut reserve parachute would later indicate potential gaps in his expertise, or perhaps simple oversight in the pressure of the moment. With the ransom and parachutes secured, Cooper fulfilled his promise to release the passengers. All 36 passengers and 2 of the 3 flight attendants departed the aircraft, leaving only Cooper and 4 crew members aboard: Captain Scott, First Officer Ratazak, Flight Engineer Anderson, and Flight Attendant Tina Mucklow. The released passengers were immediately escorted away from the aircraft and into the terminal. where FBI agents began conducting initial interviews to gather any useful observations about the hijacker. Part 5. The Second Flight. With the passengers safely off the plane, Cooper outlined his requirements for the second leg of the journey. He instructed the crew to fly to Mexico City with a refueling stop in Reno, Nevada. The flight's fuel capacity could not support a direct flight from Seattle to Mexico City, making the Reno stop necessary. Cooper specified precise flight parameters that demonstrated considerable knowledge of the Boeing 727's capabilities and operational characteristics. He demanded that the plane fly at the minimum possible airspeed consistent with safe operation. He specified a 15-degree flap setting, an unusual configuration that allowed the aircraft to maintain slower flight speeds without stalling. He required the plane to remain below 10,000 feet altitude throughout the journey. These specifications created the optimal conditions for a parachute jump from the aircraft while minimizing the dangers associated with high altitude, high-speed egress. Cooper's choice of flight parameters revealed sophisticated understanding of aviation tactics. The Boeing 727 possessed unique capabilities among commercial jet airliners of its era. Unlike most jets, the 727 could maintain slow, low-altitude flight without stalling, thanks to its powerful engines and advanced wing design. The flap setting Cooper requested gave him control over the aircraft's performance envelope without requiring him to enter the cockpit, where he could have been overpowered by the three pilots. The crew informed Cooper that his requested flight parameters would significantly increase fuel consumption, potentially requiring additional refueling stops. Cooper accepted these limitations, apparently unconcerned about extending the flight time. The priority for his plan centered on maintaining the specific altitude and airspeed that would allow a survivable parachute jump. Before departure, the aircraft needed refueling. Ground crew approached the plane to service it, while Cooper remained aboard with the 4 crew members. During the refueling process, Cooper kept the shades drawn on all windows and maintained vigilant watch to prevent law enforcement from attempting to board the aircraft or take action against him. Northwest Orient Flight 305 departed Seattle-Tacoma Airport for the second time at 7:46 p.m. Pacific Time. The crew members locked themselves in the cockpit as Cooper had instructed, leaving him alone in the passenger cabin. Cooper had directed Tina Mucklow to remain in the cockpit with the pilots and flight engineer, removing any potential witnesses to his escape preparations. Military jets had been scrambled to follow Flight 305, including 2 F-106 Delta Darts from the 318th Fighter Interceptor Squadron. However, the pursuit aircraft faced significant challenges. The 727's slow flight speed, approximately 170 knots, proved too slow for the jet fighters to maintain stable flight. The F-106 were forced to fly in zigzag patterns, constantly adjusting their speed and direction to avoid overtaking the lumbering airliner. This maneuvering made it impossible for the fighter pilots to maintain continuous visual contact with the 727. Additionally, a Lockheed C-130 Hercules from the 41st Air Rescue and Recovery Squadron at Hamilton Air Force Base in California was dispatched to follow Flight 305. Captain Bruce Kennard commanded the C-130, which flew at approximately 12,000 feet altitude, about 2,000 feet above the 727, trailing approximately 5 miles behind with all exterior lights extinguished. The goal was to track the aircraft and potentially observe any parachutist exiting the plane. However, the poor visibility conditions, low cloud cover, and darkness made observation extremely difficult. Part 6. The Jump. Approximately 30 minutes after departing Seattle, at around 8:20 p.m., the cockpit crew received their last communication from Cooper via the intercom system. He asked Tina Mucklow to demonstrate how to operate the rear door and deploy the air stair. Mucklow provided these instructions and then retreated to the cockpit as Cooper had directed. She secured the cockpit door behind her, effectively isolating Cooper in the passenger cabin. At 8:05 p.m., Cooper made his final intercom contact with the crew, requesting that they not enter the passenger cabin under any circumstances. After this communication, silence fell. The crew heard no further sounds from the cabin. They could only monitor instrument readings and wait for signs of what Cooper might do next. At 8:12 p.m., the flight crew felt a slight oscillation in the aircraft, a subtle change in the plane's behavior that suggested something had occurred in the rear cabin. Then, at approximately 8:13 p.m., the crew experienced a sudden pressure change. The cabin pressure gauge reacted violently, and the pilots felt a distinct pressure bump that indicated the rear air stair had been deployed and weight had been removed from the aircraft. The tail section pitched upward momentarily as the deployed stairs created drag and altered the aircraft's aerodynamic characteristics. The pressure change and oscillation provided the crew with their first solid indication that Cooper had jumped. Captain Scott immediately attempted to contact Cooper via the intercom, but received no response. The crew could not physically enter the passenger cabin to verify Cooper's absence without potentially endangering themselves if he remained aboard. They maintained their course toward Reno, landing at approximately 10:15 p.m. Pacific Time. When FBI agents and law enforcement personnel stormed aboard the aircraft at Reno, conducting a thorough search with weapons drawn, they discovered the passenger cabin empty except for the evidence Cooper had left behind. The rear air stair remained deployed, hanging open beneath the aircraft. The canvas bank bag that had contained some of the ransom money lay on the cabin floor, empty except for a few bills. Cooper had used the nylon cord from one of the parachutes to secure the money bag, then apparently tied or attached it to his body for the jump. Investigators found Cooper's black clip-on tie still in the cabin, discarded before the jump. The tie would later provide a DNA sample, though one that yielded no definitive matches to any suspect. 8 cigarette butts remained in the ashtray near Cooper's seat, evidence of his chain smoking during the flight. 2 of the 4 parachutes remained aboard. Cooper had taken both main parachutes, but left behind both reserve parachutes. Interestingly, he had also taken the reserve parachute that had been sewn shut for training use, using its nylon cord to secure his money, apparently unaware that the chute itself could not be deployed. The ransom note that Cooper had first handed to Florence Schaffner was not found aboard the aircraft. Cooper had either taken it with him or destroyed it during the flight. This attention to removing potential evidence suggested planning and awareness of forensic considerations. Part 7. The search begins. The moment authorities confirmed Cooper had jumped from Flight 305, one of the most extensive manhunts in American history began. The FBI formally designated the case NORJAK, an acronym for Northwest Hijacking. The investigation would eventually span 45 years, involve thousands of interviews, examine hundreds of suspects, and become one of the longest and most exhaustive investigations in FBI history. The immediate challenge facing investigators centered on determining where Cooper had landed. The flight crew could not pinpoint the exact moment of the jump with perfect precision. The pressure change at 8:13 p.m. provided the best estimate, but flight speed, wind conditions, and aircraft position all factored into calculating a potential drop zone. Based on early computer projections and flight path analysis, the FBI initially estimated Cooper's drop zone lay somewhere between Ariel Dam to the north and the town of Battleground, Washington, to the south. In March 1972, after conducting detailed analysis with Northwest Orient Airlines and the United States Air Force, the FBI refined their calculations and determined Cooper most likely jumped over the town of La Center, Washington. This area encompassed heavily forested terrain, rugged topography, and sparse population. The wilderness conditions would have made survival challenging even for an experienced outdoorsman equipped with proper gear. The FBI immediately mobilized massive search efforts. Soon after the spring thaw in early 1972, teams of FBI agents, aided by approximately 200 soldiers from Fort Lewis, along with United States Air Force personnel, National Guardsmen, and civilian volunteers, conducted thorough ground searches of Clark and Cowlitz counties. The searchers combed through the heavily wooded area for 18 days in March, and then another 18 days in April, looking for any trace of Cooper, his parachute, the ransom money, or the makeshift bag he had fashioned to carry the cash. Electronic Explorations Company, a marine salvage firm, deployed a submarine to search the 200-foot depths of Lake Merwin, a body of water within the calculated drop zone. The underwater search yielded no relevant evidence. Helicopters conducted aerial surveys of the search area, photographing and examining the terrain from above. Ground teams systematically worked through grid patterns, checking ravines, dense forest areas, and creek beds. 12 days after the hijacking, on December 6, 1971, FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover authorized an extraordinary measure. He approved the use of a United States Air Force SR-71 Blackbird, one of the most advanced reconnaissance aircraft in the world, to retrace Flight 305's flight path. The SR-71 made 5 flights over the course of several days, photographing the terrain below with sophisticated cameras capable of capturing incredible detail. However, poor visibility conditions hampered these efforts. Cloud cover and weather obscured much of the area, rendering the aerial photography less useful than investigators had hoped. During one search effort, 2 local women discovered human remains in an abandoned structure in Clark County. The skeleton generated immediate interest among investigators, hoping it might be Cooper's body. However, dental records and forensic examination identified the remains as those of Barbara Ann Derry, a teenage girl who had been abducted and murdered several weeks earlier by Warren Forrest, a suspected serial killer. The tragic discovery, while unrelated to the Cooper case, demonstrated the thoroughness of the search efforts and the challenges of conducting investigations in remote wilderness areas. Despite the extensive searches, no significant physical evidence related to the hijacking was recovered during these initial efforts. No parachute, no money, no body, no definitive sign that Cooper had ever touched the ground in the search area. The absence of evidence raised troubling questions. Had Cooper survived? Had he landed outside the calculated drop zone? Had the FBI's flight path calculations been wrong? The mystery deepened with each fruitless search operation. Part 8. The investigation expands. With ground searches yielding no physical evidence, the FBI shifted focus to identifying the hijacker through investigative techniques. Agents conducted hundreds of interviews with anyone who had been near Flight 305 or might have relevant information. The airline ticket counter employee who sold Cooper his ticket was interviewed extensively. Every passenger who had been aboard the plane was questioned about their observations. Airport workers, ground crew members, and anyone who had been at Portland International Airport on November 24, 1971, became potential sources of information. Flight attendants Florence Schaffner and Tina Mucklow worked with FBI sketch artists to create composite drawings of the hijacker. These sketches would become iconic images, reproduced in countless news articles and broadcast on television programs. 2 main composite sketches emerged from these sessions. Both depicted a white male with a conservative haircut, olive complexion, and a somewhat angular face. The sketches served as the primary visual reference for identifying suspects throughout the investigation. Fingerprint analysis revealed 66 distinct fingerprints on various surfaces inside the aircraft. FBI technicians painstakingly collected these prints and ran them through databases, attempting to match them to known criminals or individuals with records. None of the fingerprints yielded matches that led to identifying Cooper. The hijacker either had no criminal record that would place his fingerprints in law enforcement databases, wore gloves during critical moments, or managed to avoid leaving identifiable prints on searchable surfaces. The black clip-on tie Cooper left behind became a crucial piece of physical evidence. Forensic analysts examined the tie thoroughly, determining it was manufactured by J.C. Penney and represented a common style widely available at the time. The tie appeared to have been worn previously, showing normal wear patterns. Most significantly, biological material on the tie provided a potential DNA sample. However, the DNA technology available in the 1970s could not extract usable genetic profiles from such samples. The tie was carefully preserved for future analysis as forensic technology advanced. In 2001, decades after the hijacking, improved DNA analysis techniques allowed investigators to extract partial DNA profiles from the tie. However, the samples proved difficult to work with. Contamination from multiple handlers over the years, degradation of the biological material, and the limited quantity of extractable DNA all complicated analysis efforts. The FBI stated that while DNA was present on the tie, drawing firm conclusions from the samples remained challenging. The partial DNA profile could potentially exclude suspects, but could not definitively identify Cooper without a direct comparison to a known individual's DNA. The serial numbers of the ransom money created another investigative tool. The FBI distributed complete lists of the marked bills to financial institutions, businesses, and law enforcement agencies worldwide. Northwest Orient Airlines offered a reward of 15% of any recovered money, up to a maximum of $25,000, hoping to incentivize people to report any ransom bills they encountered. In early 1972, United States Attorney General John Mitchell released the serial numbers to the general public, encouraging citizens to check cash in their possession against the published list. Despite this widespread distribution of serial numbers, not a single bill from Cooper's ransom entered circulation in any detectable way during the years immediately following the hijacking. Banks reported no matches. Businesses found no marked bills. The money seemed to have vanished as completely as Cooper himself. This absence suggested either that Cooper had not survived to spend the money, that he had hidden it and never retrieved it, that he was spending it in ways that avoided detection, or that he was waiting for public attention to fade before attempting to use the cash. Two men exploited the public knowledge of the serial numbers to perpetrate a fraud. They used counterfeit $20 bills printed with Cooper's serial numbers to swindle $30,000 from a Newsweek reporter named Carl Fleming. The fraudsters claimed they could arrange an interview with Cooper himself, presenting the fake bills as proof of their connection to the hijacker. The scheme unraveled when the bills were examined and determined to be counterfeits, but the incident demonstrated the intense public interest in the case and the lengths to which opportunists would go to capitalize on that fascination. By the 5-year anniversary of the hijacking in November 1976, the FBI had examined more than 800 suspects. The investigation had systematically eliminated all but approximately 24 individuals from serious consideration. These remaining suspects shared certain characteristics: military or aviation backgrounds, parachuting experience, connections to the Pacific Northwest, ages consistent with witness descriptions, and circumstances or behaviors that suggested possible involvement. However, none of these suspects could be definitively linked to the crime through physical evidence, alibis, or other conclusive factors. Part 9. The Tena Bar Discovery. On February 10, 1980, precisely 3,000 days after the D.B. Cooper hijacking, 8-year-old Brian Ingram made a discovery that would become the only confirmed physical evidence from the hijacking ever found outside the aircraft. The Ingram family was enjoying a weekend outing along the Columbia River at a location known as Tena Bar, or Tena Bar, a stretch of sandy riverbank approximately 9 miles downstream from Vancouver, Washington, and roughly 20 miles southwest of the initially calculated drop zone near Ariel. Brian Ingram was preparing to help his father build a campfire on the beach. He raked his hand through the sand to smooth an area for the fire pit. His hand encountered something unusual, buried just beneath the surface, approximately 3 inches to 3 feet deep, depending on various accounts. Ingram dug into the sand and uncovered 3 bundles of deteriorating $20 bills, still bound together with rubber bands despite their decomposed condition. The discovery immediately generated excitement and speculation within the Ingram family. One family member mentioned that the money could possibly be part of D.B. Cooper's ransom, though they continued with their picnic rather than rushing to notify authorities. The next day, the Ingram family contacted the FBI to report the find. Agents immediately responded to Tena Bar, cordoning off the area and initiating an extensive search and excavation operation. FBI technicians confirmed that the recovered money was indeed part of Cooper's ransom. The serial numbers matched those recorded when the money was prepared in November 1971. The 3 bundles contained a total of $5,800, 2 bundles of $120 bills each, and a third bundle containing 90 bills. Most remarkably, the bills were arranged in the exact sequence they had been when given to Cooper, suggesting the bundles had remained together since the hijacking. The FBI search of Tena Bar lasted nearly a week. Agents systematically excavated the beach, looking for additional money, Cooper's parachute, his briefcase, or any other evidence that might shed light on the hijacking. The only additional material found consisted of small fragments and deteriorated pieces of bills, all discovered within the immediate vicinity of Ingram's original find. The concentrated nature of the evidence suggested it had arrived at this location as a single unit, rather than being scattered by natural processes over a wide area. The Tena Bar discovery created more questions than it answered. The location of the find lay approximately 20 miles from the FBI's calculated drop zone, forcing investigators to reconsider their flight path analysis and assumptions about where Cooper had jumped. Several theories emerged to explain how the money reached Tena Bar. The first major theory, known as the Washougal washdown theory, proposed that the money had washed down from smaller tributaries into the Columbia River. According to this scenario, Cooper might have landed in the watershed area of the Washougal River, lost the money either during impact or shortly after landing, and the bills then traveled down the Washougal into the Columbia River, eventually being deposited at Tena Bar. FBI agent Ralph Himmelsbach, who led much of the Cooper investigation, later wrote that if he were going to search for Cooper, he would head for the Washougal area based on this theory. A second theory suggested that Cooper had actually landed near or at Tena Bar itself, contradicting the FBI's calculated flight path. Under this scenario, Cooper could have buried the money at Tena Bar intentionally, either planning to retrieve it later or using it to throw off investigators. Some researchers argued that the condition and location of the money was more consistent with deliberate burial than with natural deposition by water. A third explanation proposed that someone other than Cooper, possibly a third party involved in the hijacking or someone who had discovered Cooper's body and possessions, had planted the money at Tena Bar to mislead the FBI. This theory remained speculative but could not be entirely ruled out. The condition of the bills themselves provided additional puzzles for investigators. Portland State University geologist Dr. Leonard Palmer was brought in to analyze the sand and sediment at Tena Bar. Palmer's analysis revealed that between 1971 and 1980, the Columbia River had been dredged for navigation purposes, and dredge spoils had been deposited at Tena Bar in 1974. This dredging activity complicated any simple explanation of how the money had arrived at its discovery location. In 2020, nearly 40 years after the Tena Bar discovery, paleontologist Tom Kay conducted a groundbreaking analysis of diatoms found on the recovered bills. Diatoms are microscopic algae that form glass-like shells and can be identified to specific species. Different diatom species thrive in different seasons and environmental conditions. Kay's analysis revealed that the diatoms present on Cooper's money were species that only bloom during spring and summer months, particularly between May and June. This finding was significant because Cooper had jumped in November. If the money had entered the water immediately after the hijacking, the diatom species present should have reflected November conditions. The presence of spring and summer diatoms indicated that the money only became wet several months after the hijacking, sometime between May and June 1972. Furthermore, the analysis suggested the money had been in water for only a few weeks, not the years between 1971 and 1980. These findings point strongly toward the money having been stored in a dry location for months after the hijacking, then becoming wet for a brief period, and subsequently remaining dry again until being buried or deposited at Tena Bar. While this doesn't prove human intervention, the evidence appears consistent with deliberate movement and handling of the money rather than natural processes. These scientific findings dramatically change the understanding of the Tena Bar money. The money had not floated down rivers for 9 years. It had not been continuously submerged in the Columbia River. Instead, the evidence suggested deliberate human intervention at some point, raising the possibility that Cooper or someone else had moved and buried the money at Tena Bar long after the hijacking occurred. The Ingram family's experience with the discovery highlighted the complexities surrounding the ransom money. After protracted negotiations, the recovered bills were divided equally in 1986 between Brian Ingram and Northwest Orient's insurance company, Royal Globe Insurance. The FBI retained 14 bills as evidence. Ingram eventually sold 15 of his bills at auction in 2008 for approximately $37,000, equivalent to about $54,000 in 2024 dollars. The bills had become valuable collectibles, their worth far exceeding their face value due to their historical significance. The Tena Bar discovery remains the only confirmed physical evidence from the Cooper hijacking ever found outside the aircraft. The money answered no questions about Cooper's identity or fate, but it demonstrated that at least some of the ransom had survived intact for nearly 9 years and provided tantalizing clues about what might have happened after Cooper jumped from Flight 305. Part 10. The Suspects. Over the decades of investigation, hundreds of individuals were examined as potential suspects in the Cooper hijacking. The FBI's formal case file documents more than 800 people who were investigated to varying degrees. Most were quickly eliminated through alibis, physical descriptions that didn't match witness accounts, lack of relevant skills or knowledge, or other disqualifying factors. However, several suspects received sustained attention from investigators, researchers, and the media, each presenting compelling circumstantial evidence that warranted serious consideration. Richard Floyd McCoy Jr. Richard Floyd McCoy Jr. emerged as perhaps the most prominent suspect in the D.B. Cooper case, drawing attention due to his execution of a remarkably similar hijacking just 5 months after Cooper's crime. On April 7, 1972, McCoy boarded United Airlines Flight 855 under the alias James Johnson during a stopover in Denver, Colorado. The flight, a Boeing 727 with rear air stairs identical to the equipment Cooper had used, was en route from Newark, New Jersey to Los Angeles. McCoy's hijacking followed Cooper's playbook with eerie precision. He claimed to have a bomb, demanding $500,000 in cash and 4 parachutes. When the aircraft landed at San Francisco International Airport, McCoy received his ransom and parachutes, released the passengers, and ordered the plane back into the air. Flying over Utah, McCoy deployed the rear air stair and parachuted from the aircraft landing near Provo. Unlike Cooper, however, McCoy was captured within 72 hours. The FBI's case against McCoy for the Utah hijacking was comprehensive and damning. A motorist had picked up a man matching McCoy's description hitchhiking near the drop zone shortly after the jump. The hitchhiker wore a jumpsuit and carried a duffel bag. Investigators obtained a tip that McCoy had previously outlined a foolproof hijacking plan to an acquaintance. A hamburger stand employee reported selling a milkshake to someone matching McCoy's appearance on the night of the hijacking. A teenager stated that McCoy had paid him $5 for a ride from the hamburger stand to a nearby town. The physical evidence proved conclusive. Fingerprints found on a Mainliner magazine left at McCoy's seat matched his military service records. Handwriting analysis confirmed that McCoy had written the hijacking note. A search of McCoy's Provo home under warrant recovered $499,970 of the ransom money, an electric typewriter with key impressions matching the typed hijacking instructions, and various pieces of skydiving equipment. McCoy was convicted and sentenced to 45 years in prison. Given these circumstances, investigators immediately considered McCoy as a suspect for the Cooper hijacking. McCoy possessed the precise skill set necessary for both crimes. Born December 7, 1942, in Kinston, North Carolina, McCoy had served 2 tours of duty in Vietnam as a decorated Green Beret, demolitions expert, and helicopter pilot. He had received the Purple Heart in 1964 and later earned the Army Commendation Medal and Distinguished Flying Cross. His military background included extensive parachute training. He was studying criminal justice at Brigham Young University at the time of both hijackings. He possessed intimate knowledge of aviation and aircraft operations. Despite these compelling connections, the FBI officially ruled out McCoy as the Cooper hijacker, citing several key discrepancies. Most significantly, McCoy was only 29 years old in November 1971, while multiple witnesses described Cooper as appearing to be in his mid-40s. The physical descriptions provided by flight attendants Schaffner and Mucklow did not match McCoy's appearance. McCoy's wife Karen provided an alibi, stating that her husband had been home in Utah for Thanksgiving dinner on November 25, 1971, the day after the Cooper hijacking. Her sister Denise corroborated this alibi. The FBI concluded that given the timeline and distance between the suspected drop zone in Washington and Utah, McCoy could not have executed both the jump and the return home in time for Thanksgiving dinner unless he had assistance. However, doubts about this official ruling persisted. 2 former FBI agents who had worked on the investigations, Bernie Rhodes and Russell Calamay, became convinced that McCoy was indeed D.B. Cooper. In 1991, they published a book titled D.B. Cooper, The Real McCoy, presenting their evidence and arguments. The book claimed that Karen McCoy had been deeply involved in both hijackings, helping plan and execute the crimes. According to the authors, Karen and her sister Denise had provided false alibis to protect McCoy. The book contained serious allegations that Karen had conspired with the FBI to have her husband killed. Karen McCoy filed a lawsuit against the book's authors and publisher, claiming the allegations were false and defamatory. During court proceedings, Karen admitted under oath that she had assisted her husband with the Utah hijacking, though she claimed she was a victim of severe childhood abuse that influenced her actions. The court granted an injunction preventing further sales of the book unless certain passages were removed. The publisher and authors eventually settled with Karen McCoy, paying her a total of $120,000. McCoy's story ended tragically and dramatically. On August 10, 1974, while incarcerated at the federal penitentiary at Lewisburg, Pennsylvania, McCoy orchestrated a daring escape. Using his access to the prison's dental office, he had fashioned a fake handgun from dental paste. McCoy and 3 other inmates commandeered a garbage truck and crashed through the prison's main gate, successfully escaping. 3 months later, FBI agents tracked McCoy to Virginia Beach, Virginia. On November 9, 1974, agents approached McCoy's residence. A gunfight erupted. FBI agent Nick O'Hara fired a shotgun, killing McCoy. He was 31 years old. The debate about McCoy's potential involvement in the Cooper hijacking continued long after his death. In 2020, the FBI released documents through Freedom of Information Act requests revealing that, as late as 2004, the Bureau had not completely eliminated McCoy as a Cooper suspect. Agents had been attempting to obtain DNA samples from McCoy's family members to compare against the DNA recovered from Cooper's tie. The agency's continued interest in McCoy more than 3 decades after his death suggested that some investigators remained unconvinced by the official ruling that excluded him. In 2023, the Cooper case experienced a dramatic development when McCoy's adult children, Shantae and Richard III, known as Rick, decided to come forward with new evidence. They had waited until after their mother Karen's death in 2020 before approaching investigators, fearing that revealing their suspicions while she was alive might implicate her in crimes. The siblings contacted Dan Grider, a retired pilot and amateur investigator who had been researching the Cooper case extensively. In July 2022, Grider visited the McCoy family property in North Carolina. In a storage area that had belonged to Karen McCoy, Grider and the siblings discovered a modified military surplus parachute rig. Grider described it as 1 in a billion, a unique piece of equipment that matched descriptions of the type of rig that would have been suitable for the Cooper jump. The siblings also possessed a skydiving logbook that had belonged to their father. The logbook contained entries that appeared to align with the timeline of both the Cooper hijacking in Oregon and McCoy's confirmed hijacking in Utah. The FBI took this new evidence seriously. In 2023, agents contacted Grider after viewing videos he had posted online documenting the parachute discovery. FBI personnel met with Grider and Rick McCoy, collecting the parachute, harness, and logbook as evidence. A month later, the FBI conducted a comprehensive search of the McCoy family property in North Carolina. Dozens of agents spent approximately 4 hours examining every part of the property, looking for additional evidence that might connect Richard McCoy to the Cooper hijacking. According to reports in 2024, the FBI even requested permission to exhume McCoy's body, which was buried on the family property, presumably to obtain direct DNA samples for comparison with the DNA from Cooper's tie. Whether this exhumation was conducted and what results it might have yielded remains unclear, as the FBI has not publicly released findings from these recent investigative activities. Robert Wesley Rackstraw. Robert Wesley Rackstraw presented a dramatically different suspect profile from McCoy, embodying the archetype of a shadowy figure with extensive criminal history and alleged connections to covert intelligence operations. Born in Columbus, Ohio in 1943, Rackstraw led an eventful and troubled life that intersected repeatedly with law enforcement, making him a perennial figure of interest in the Cooper investigation. Rackstraw dropped out of high school, but later joined the United States Army, where he became a paratrooper, explosives expert, and helicopter pilot. He served in Vietnam during 1969 and 1970, earning dozens of air medals and commendations for his service. However, his military career ended abruptly in June 1971 when he was dishonorably discharged for various misconduct violations, including lying about finishing high school and other infractions. After leaving the military, Rackstraw's life descended into increasingly serious criminal activity. In the 1970s, he faced charges for grand theft, writing $75,000 worth of bad checks, and possession of explosives. Most sensationally, he was charged with murdering his stepfather. Though ultimately acquitted of the murder charge, the case generated significant publicity, and brought Rackstraw to law enforcement's attention across multiple jurisdictions. Rackstraw first appeared on the FBI's radar regarding the Cooper case in February 1978 when he was arrested in Iran and deported to the United States to face explosives possession and check kiting charges. Several months later, while released on bail, Rackstraw attempted an audacious escape from justice by faking his own death. He radioed a false Mayday call, claiming his rented airplane was experiencing catastrophic failure and that he was bailing out over Monterey Bay in California. Investigators later discovered the supposedly crashed aircraft had been repaired, repainted, and stored in a nearby hangar. Rackstraw was arrested again in Fullerton, California, on charges of forging federal pilot certificates, aircraft theft, and fraud. FBI agents investigating the Cooper case noted Rackstraw's physical resemblance to the composite sketches of the hijacker. He possessed extensive military parachute training and aviation expertise. His criminal history demonstrated both sophistication in planning crimes and brazen execution. His age in 1971, 28 years old, was younger than witness descriptions suggested, but not impossibly so. Some investigators felt that Rackstraw could have appeared older than his actual age, particularly if he had worn makeup or prosthetics to alter his appearance. Despite these intriguing connections, the FBI officially eliminated Rackstraw as a Cooper suspect in 1979. No direct evidence linked him to the hijacking. His alibi, while not thoroughly investigated according to some critics, appeared to place him elsewhere on November 24, 1971. Without physical evidence or witness identification, the case against Rackstraw remained entirely circumstantial. Rackstraw was convicted on several criminal charges and served approximately 2 years in prison. After his release, he remarkably rebuilt his life, earning 3 degrees and eventually becoming a respected law instructor and arbitration expert at the University of California, Riverside. He worked in this capacity for many years, apparently having left his criminal past behind. In the 2000s and 2010s, Rackstraw returned to public attention as a Cooper suspect through the work of documentary filmmaker Thomas J. Colbert. Colbert assembled a team of approximately 40 retired investigators, including former FBI agents, and conducted a 5-year investigation into Rackstraw's background and potential involvement in the Cooper hijacking. In 2016, Colbert and co-author Tom Solosi published a book titled The Last Master Outlaw: How He Outfoxed the FBI 6 Times, but Not a Cold Case Team, detailing their findings. Colbert's team identified more than 100 pieces of circumstantial evidence that they believed pointed to Rackstraw as Cooper. A law enforcement expert compared a 1970 Army ID photo of Rackstraw to the FBI's composite sketch and claimed there were 9 points of match between the images, including ears, nose, eyes, mouth, facial features, chin, brows, head shape, and hair pattern. The team also obtained what they claimed were coded letters, allegedly sent by Cooper to newspapers shortly after the hijacking. A former Vietnam War codebreaker named Rick Sherwood analyzed these letters and claimed they contained coded messages that pointed to Rackstraw as the author. One of the coded letters allegedly stated, "And please tell the lackey cops D.B. Cooper is not my real name. I am First Lieutenant Robert Rackstraw." However, critics questioned the validity of these codes and whether the letters were authentically connected to the Cooper case. Flight attendant Florence Schaffner, when shown photographs of Rackstraw from the 1970s, reportedly stated that she did not find any similarities between the images and her recollection of Cooper's appearance. Perhaps the most controversial aspect of Colbert's investigation involved allegations that Rackstraw had worked as a CIA operative or asset, both before and after the Cooper hijacking. According to Colbert's team, Rackstraw had connections to covert intelligence operations during his time in Vietnam and continued conducting missions for the CIA in subsequent years. The theory proposed that the FBI had deliberately protected Rackstraw from prosecution for the Cooper hijacking because exposing him would have compromised sensitive intelligence operations or embarrassed the CIA. Colbert claimed that multiple intelligence community sources had confirmed Rackstraw's CIA involvement and stated that the agency knew he was Cooper. In 2016, Colbert filed a lawsuit under the Freedom of Information Act, seeking the release of FBI files related to Rackstraw and the Cooper case. Court-released documents and recovered emails from the James Comey administration at the FBI allegedly showed that FBI agents strongly believed Rackstraw was D.B. Cooper, and that he had admitted to having the skill sets necessary to pull off the hijacking. Former FBI agent Nick O'Hara, who had been involved in the McCoy investigation and later killed McCoy in the 1974 shootout, stated in an interview with Grider's investigative team that he believed Rackstraw was Cooper and that the FBI had dropped the ball by not pursuing the case more aggressively. However, not all investigators agreed with this assessment. Retired FBI Special Agent Larry Carr, who briefly oversaw the Cooper case in 2007, expressed skepticism about the Rackstraw theory and stated he wasn't aware of any new FBI involvement in the case as of 2024. Throughout his life, Rackstraw maintained an ambiguous stance regarding the Cooper allegations. He never admitted to being D.B. Cooper, but he also never categorically denied it. When asked directly, Rackstraw would often respond with cryptic comments or vague statements that neither confirmed nor refuted his involvement. His attorney, Dennis Roberts, denied that Rackstraw was Cooper, calling the allegations the stupidest thing I've ever heard. However, Roberts also made a curious statement, claiming that Rackstraw was responsible for another unsolved hijacking, though transportation experts have stated there are no other unsolved American airborne robberies on record. In a 2013 email to attorney Mark Zaid, Roberts noted that Bobby always enjoyed letting people think he is D.B. Cooper. Rackstraw himself confirmed in a face-to-face meeting with Colbert in 2013 that he had told everybody he was the skyjacker, though whether this represented truth or simply playing with investigators remained unclear. Robert Wesley Rackstraw died of heart disease on July 9, 2019, at the age of 75. He took whatever secrets he possessed to his grave. To his final days, Rackstraw maintained that allegations of being D.B. Cooper were destroying his life, yet he seemed to derive some satisfaction from the speculation and attention. Whether he was actually the hijacker, a skilled con man who manipulated people into believing he was Cooper, or simply a troubled individual whose criminal history made him an appealing suspect, remains a matter of debate. Kenneth Peter Christiansen. Kenneth Christiansen represented yet another compelling suspect, distinguished by his direct employment connection to Northwest Orient Airlines. Born in 1926, Christiansen enlisted in the United States Army in 1944 and trained as a paratrooper during World War II. Although the war ended before he saw combat, he was deployed to Japan with occupation forces during the late 1940s and made occasional training jumps while stationed there. After leaving the Army, Christiansen joined Northwest Orient in 1954, initially working as a mechanic at the airline's operations in the South Pacific. He subsequently transferred to positions as a flight attendant and eventually a purser working out of Seattle. This employment gave Christiansen intimate knowledge of the Boeing 727 aircraft, including the layout of its cabin, the operation of the rear air stair, and the procedures followed by flight crews. He would have understood exactly how Northwest Orient responded to various situations and what security measures, or lack thereof, existed in 1971. Christiansen came to investigators' attention through an unexpected source, his own brother. In 2003, Lyle Christiansen watched a television documentary about the Cooper hijacking and became convinced that his late brother Kenneth had been the hijacker. Kenneth had died of cancer in 1994 at the age of 68, but Lyle was struck by the physical resemblance between Kenneth's photographs and the FBI composite sketches of Cooper. After repeated unsuccessful attempts to convince the FBI to take his suspicions seriously, Lyle contacted private investigator Skip Porteous in New York City. Porteous investigated the Christiansen theory, and in 2010 published a book proposing that Kenneth Christiansen was D.B. Cooper. In 2011, the History Channel series Brad Meltzer's Decoded produced an episode examining the circumstantial evidence linking Christiansen to the case. Washington State University professor Buddy Levy served as one of the investigators on the program and became convinced that Christiansen represented the strongest suspect in the case. The circumstantial evidence supporting the Christiansen theory was extensive, if not conclusive. Christiansen's physical characteristics generally matched witness descriptions. He was approximately 6 feet tall and slender, consistent with the reported 170 to 175 pound estimate. He had dark hair similar to the composite sketches. Christiansen was 45 years old in November 1971, perfectly matching the mid-40s age assessment provided by witnesses. Christiansen smoked Raleigh cigarettes, the same brand Cooper had smoked aboard Flight 305. He drank bourbon, Cooper's drink of choice. He was left-handed, as some witnesses believed Cooper might have been based on his mannerisms. Most intriguingly, Christiansen had written letters to relatives expressing frustration and resentment about labor disputes at Northwest Orient and complaining about lack of pay. Levy suggested this provided motive, characterizing Christiansen as a disgruntled employee seeking revenge or compensation. The financial evidence seemed particularly suspicious to Christiansen's proponents. Before the hijacking, Kenneth Christiansen had struggled financially, frequently borrowing money from friends and family. However, within a year after the Cooper incident, Christiansen's financial situation changed dramatically. He purchased a house in Bonnie Lake, Washington, paying cash for the property. He began lending substantial sums to friends, including documented loans of $5,000 to multiple individuals. His brother Lyle reported that a cold spot was found in the attic of Kenneth's home, suggesting a possible hiding place for money. Additionally, $2,000 in cash was reportedly found buried on property previously owned by Christiansen, though this claim has been disputed. Flight attendant Florence Schaffner told reporters that when shown photographs of Kenneth Christiansen, she felt the images fit her memory of the hijacker's appearance more closely than photographs of other suspects she had examined. However, Schaffner also stated she could not conclusively identify Christiansen as Cooper, acknowledging the limitations of memory after several years had passed. Critics of the Christiansen theory pointed out significant problems with the evidence. The FBI maintained that Christiansen's physical description did not match witness accounts sufficiently. Specifically, investigators noted discrepancies in height, weight, eye color, and skin tone that made Christiansen an imperfect match. More fundamentally, Christiansen was employed by Northwest Orient at the time of the hijacking and for many years afterward. This employment should have placed him at greater risk of identification if he had been Cooper. Co-workers, supervisors, and other employees who dealt with Boeing. 727 operations might have recognized similarities between Christiansen and the composite sketches. The fact that no Northwest employee flagged Christiansen as suspicious seemed to argue against his involvement. Additionally, documents obtained from public records revealed inaccuracies in some claims made by Christiansen theory proponents. Property records showed that Christiansen had purchased his Bonnie Lake home in 1972, but did not pay off the mortgage until nearly 2 decades later, contradicting claims that he had purchased it outright with cash. Financial records suggested that Christiansen had sold a large property he had owned for years before the hijacking, providing a legitimate source for his improved financial situation. Claims about a valuable coin and stamp collection owned by Christiansen varied wildly in estimated value, from $400,000 to $300,000 to just $30,000, suggesting possible exaggeration or confusion about his assets. Perhaps most damaging to the theory was the absence of corroboration from people who knew Christiansen. Despite the public attention on the case and the specific allegations about Kenneth, no friends, relatives, other than Lyle, or colleagues came forward to report suspicious behavior, unexplained absences, or comments that might connect Kenneth to the hijacking. The lack of such testimony seemed unusual if Christiansen had indeed been Cooper. Kenneth Christiansen died in 1994, taking his secrets with him. Without the possibility of DNA comparison or the opportunity to interview him directly, the question of his involvement remains speculative. The FBI's official position holds that Christiansen cannot be considered a prime suspect due to poor matches with eyewitness descriptions and the complete absence of direct incriminating evidence. Other notable suspects. Beyond McCoy, Rackstraw, and Christiansen, numerous other individuals were investigated as potential Cooper suspects, each with varying degrees of plausibility. Lynn Doyle Cooper, a Korean War veteran, came under suspicion after his niece, Maria Cooper, reported in 2011 that she had heard her uncle say, in 1971, "We did it. Our money problems are over. We hijacked an airplane." The FBI investigated, but ultimately ruled out Lynn Cooper, who died in 1999, as a suspect. The timing of the report, more than a decade after Lynn's death, and the lack of corroborating evidence made it difficult to pursue the lead meaningfully. William Gossett was a Marine Corps, Army, and Army Air Forces veteran who served in Korea and Vietnam. He possessed parachute training and survival skills consistent with Cooper's demonstrated abilities. In 2008, Gossett's son Greg reported that in 1988, when Greg turned 21, his father had shown him the FBI sketch of Cooper and asked who it resembled. Greg believed his father was confessing to being Cooper. Gossett claimed to have hidden the ransom money in a safety deposit box, though no one ever verified this claim by checking the box. The FBI found no evidence placing Gossett in the Pacific Northwest at the time of the hijacking, and FBI Special Agent Larry Carr stated there was not one link to the D.B. Cooper case other than Gossett's statements. William J. Smith, a World War II veteran with combat aircrew training, emerged as a suspect in November 2018 based on research conducted by an anonymous Army data analyst. The analyst wrote to the FBI stating his professional opinion that there were too many connections to be simply a coincidence. Smith had worked for Lehigh Valley Railroad and was affected by the Penn Central Transportation Company's bankruptcy in 1970, potentially providing financial motivation for the hijacking. However, no direct evidence linked Smith to the crime. Barbara Dayton presented one of the most unusual suspect theories. Dayton was an aviation enthusiast and World War II veteran who underwent gender reassignment surgery. She claimed to have boarded Flight 305 while presenting as male and provided detailed accounts of how she pulled off the hijacking. However, when Dayton learned that authorities were still prepared to prosecute whoever committed the crime, she quickly withdrew her claim, stating she had only been joking or seeking attention. Part 11. The impact on aviation security. The D.B. Cooper hijacking and the wave of copycat incidents it inspired prompted immediate and fundamental changes to aviation security throughout the United States and worldwide. The ease with which Cooper had commandeered Flight 305, extorted ransom, and escaped demonstrated glaring vulnerabilities in commercial aviation systems. Airlines, airports, the Federal Aviation Administration, and law enforcement agencies recognized that comprehensive security overhauls were necessary to prevent future incidents. The most visible change came in the form of mandatory passenger screening. Metal detectors were installed at airports beginning in 1972, requiring all passengers to pass through screening before boarding aircraft. This represented a dramatic shift in the passenger experience, transforming airports from open, accessible spaces into controlled security zones. Baggage inspection became mandatory, with screening personnel examining both checked luggage and carry-on bags for weapons, explosives, or other dangerous items. New protocols targeted cash-paying passengers who purchased tickets on the day of departure, as Cooper had done. Airlines were required to subject these passengers to additional scrutiny, including more thorough questioning about travel plans and more detailed examination of their belongings. These measures aimed to identify potential hijackers who might be attempting to board aircraft without creating paper trails that could assist later identification efforts. The Boeing 727's rear air stair, which had enabled Cooper's escape, became the focus of specific security modifications. In 1972, following 3 hijackings that used the Cooper method, the Federal Aviation Administration issued regulations requiring that aircraft equipped with ventral air stairs or tail cone exits be fitted with devices to prevent those exits from being opened in flight. The solution took the form of a simple but effective mechanism that came to be known as the Cooper Vane, named directly after the hijacker. The Cooper Vane consists of a spring-loaded paddle connected to a plate that mechanically prevents the air stair from being lowered when the aircraft is in flight. When an aircraft is parked on the ground, the spring holds the paddle perpendicular to the fuselage, allowing the stairs to operate normally. As the aircraft takes off and airspeed increases, aerodynamic forces push the paddle flat against the fuselage, moving an attached plate underneath the stairway mechanism and blocking it from being deployed. Upon landing, when airspeed decreases, the paddle returns to its perpendicular position, restoring normal stair operation. The device was remarkably simple, reliable, and effective, making it impossible for anyone to recreate Cooper's method of escape. All Boeing 727 aircraft were retrofitted with Cooper vanes, and other aircraft equipped with rear air stairs received similar modifications. The device became a permanent feature on these aircraft for the remainder of their service lives. Some airlines chose to eliminate rear air stairs entirely from their fleets, opting for aircraft designs that relied exclusively on conventional door exits that could be more easily controlled and secured. The security improvements extended beyond physical barriers to include enhanced passenger manifesting and identification systems. Airlines began maintaining more detailed records of passenger information. Law enforcement agencies gained improved access to flight manifests and passenger data. Communications protocols between aircraft, air traffic control, and law enforcement were standardized to ensure rapid, coordinated responses to any hijacking attempts. By 1973, just 2 years after Cooper's hijacking, aircraft hijacking incidents in the United States had decreased dramatically. The new security measures successfully dissuaded would-be hijackers whose primary motivation was financial gain. The physical barriers and screening procedures made it virtually impossible to board an aircraft with weapons or fake bombs. The enhanced passenger screening meant that hijackers could no longer remain anonymous, and the Cooper Vane eliminated the specific escape method that had made Cooper's crime seem like a potentially survivable venture. The D.B. Cooper hijacking thus served as an inflection point in aviation history, marking the end of an era when commercial flight was largely unsecured and the beginning of the modern security-conscious aviation system. Every passenger who passes through airport security today does so partly because of what happened aboard Northwest Orient Flight 305 on November 24, 1971. Part 12. The Cultural Phenomenon. Beyond its impact on aviation security and criminal investigation, the D.B. Cooper hijacking achieved a unique status in American popular culture. Cooper became a folk hero to many Americans, an anti-establishment figure who had seemingly outwitted authorities and escaped with a fortune. Unlike violent criminals who inspired fear and revulsion, Cooper had harmed no one during his crime. He had been polite and professional with crew members. He had released all passengers unharmed. He had made his escape without shooting anyone or causing injury. This bloodless execution of a daring crime struck a chord with a public that was increasingly distrustful of institutions during the turbulent 1970s. The mystery itself proved irresistible to amateur sleuths and professional investigators alike. Countless books have been written about the case, each proposing different theories about Cooper's identity, his fate, and what happened to the ransom money. Documentary films and television programs have examined every aspect of the hijacking, from the technical details of the jump to the psychology of the hijacker to the forensic analysis of physical evidence. Netflix produced a documentary series titled D.B. Cooper, Where Are You?, that explored various suspects and theories. HBO released The Mystery of D.B. Cooper, which took a different approach to examining the case. The History Channel aired D.B. Cooper, Case Closed, which focused specifically on the Robert Rackstraw theory. These productions, along with numerous smaller-scale documentaries and investigative reports, ensured that new generations continued to encounter and become fascinated by the Cooper mystery. The case inspired fictional treatments as well. Cooper appeared as a character or reference in films, television shows, and novels. The 1981 film The Pursuit of D.B. Cooper, starring Robert Duvall and Treat Williams, presented a fictional account of the hijacking and its aftermath. The television series Prison Break featured a character claiming to be D.B. Cooper. The series Mad Men included a reference to the hijacking. The comedy series 30 Rock featured an episode where Alec Baldwin's character pretends to be D.B. Cooper. Even the groundbreaking series Breaking Bad included a humorous reference when the character Saul Goodman quips to Walter White, "Should I call the FBI and tell them I found D.B. Cooper?" These cultural references demonstrated how thoroughly the Cooper mystery had permeated American consciousness. Annual D.B. Cooper conferences and symposiums brought together enthusiasts, researchers, and investigators to share theories and examine evidence. The 40th Anniversary Symposium, held in Portland in 2011, attracted attendees from across the country, all eager to discuss the latest developments and debate competing theories about the case. These gatherings created communities of Cooper enthusiasts who spent years, sometimes decades, pursuing their own investigations and developing detailed theories about every aspect of the hijacking. The town of Ariel, Washington, near the initially calculated drop zone, embraced its connection to the Cooper legend. The local bar and restaurant held annual D.B. Cooper Day celebrations, where patrons dressed in business suits and ties drank bourbon and 7-Up, and celebrated the anniversary of the hijacking. The festival developed into a significant local event, drawing visitors who wanted to experience a piece of Cooper lore and explore the wilderness where he might have landed. Tena Bar, where Brian Ingram discovered the ransom money, became a pilgrimage site for Cooper enthusiasts. Investigators and amateur sleuths regularly visited the location, conducting their own searches and examinations of the area, hoping to find additional evidence that might solve the mystery. The site's appearance changed dramatically over the decades due to erosion and altered dredging practices, but its significance in the Cooper story remained constant. The fascination with D.B. Cooper revealed something fundamental about American culture and psychology. The mystery represented an unsolvable puzzle, a challenge to investigators and amateur detectives who believed they could succeed where the FBI had failed. Cooper embodied the romantic notion of the perfect crime, the idea that with sufficient planning and audacity, one could beat the system and disappear. For many Americans disillusioned by government, corporations, and institutions during the 1970s, Cooper represented a figure who had taken direct action against the establishment and, potentially, gotten away with it. The case also highlighted the enduring appeal of mysteries that remain unsolved. In an age of increasing technological surveillance, forensic capabilities, and investigative resources, the fact that Cooper's identity remained unknown seemed almost impossible. This impossibility made the case more fascinating rather than less. Each new piece of evidence, each new suspect, each new theory reignited public interest and debate. The mystery had no satisfying resolution, no clear ending, forcing people to grapple with uncertainty and ambiguity. Part 13. The FBI closes the case. On July 8, 2016, the FBI formally announced that it was suspending active investigation of the D.B. Cooper case. The decision came after 45 years of investigation, making NORJAK one of the longest-running investigations in FBI history. The Bureau stated that following one of the most exhaustive investigations in its history, resources allocated to the Cooper case needed to be redirected to other investigative priorities. The announcement clarified that the FBI had exhausted all credible leads through decades of work. Agents had interviewed hundreds of witnesses, examined more than 800 suspects, coordinated searches across multiple field offices, collected all available evidence, and applied numerous new investigative techniques as they became available. The FBI laboratory had examined countless items over the years, using the most advanced forensic methods of each era. Nothing had produced a definitive identification of the hijacker. The FBI emphasized that although active investigation was suspended, the case would not be completely closed. Evidence obtained during the investigation would be preserved for historical purposes at FBI headquarters in Washington, D.C. Most significantly, the Bureau stated that if specific physical evidence emerged related specifically to the parachutes or the money taken by Cooper, the agency would examine it. This conditional reopening clause left the door open for future developments while acknowledging the improbability of such evidence materializing after more than 4 decades. The decision to suspend active investigation reflected practical realities facing law enforcement agencies. The FBI's resources are finite, and the Cooper case had consumed substantial time, money, and personnel over decades without producing results. Newer cases with better prospects for resolution deserved priority. Cases involving ongoing threats to public safety required attention. The Cooper hijacking, while fascinating from historical and cultural perspectives, represented a crime from which all participants were likely deceased by 2016. Even if Cooper had survived his jump and escaped with the money, he would have been in his 80s or 90s by 2016. The urgency of identifying him had diminished with each passing year. The FBI's announcement generated mixed reactions. Some Cooper enthusiasts felt frustrated that the Bureau was giving up on solving one of the most famous mysteries in American history. Others understood the practical necessity of reallocating resources to more pressing cases. Many researchers and investigators stated that the FBI's withdrawal from active investigation would not stop their own efforts. Amateur sleuths and private investigators who had spent years or decades pursuing the Cooper mystery vowed to continue their work regardless of official FBI involvement. The evidence preserved by the FBI included the physical items recovered from Flight 305, Cooper's tie, the cigarette butts, the parachutes left aboard, the canvas bag used to hold the money, and various other items collected during the initial investigation. The ransom bills discovered at Tena Bar and the documentation of their condition and location were carefully maintained. The composite sketches, witness statements, flight path analyses, and thousands of pages of investigative records were archived. This comprehensive collection created a treasure trove for future researchers who might approach the case with fresh perspectives or new technologies. Part 14. Recent developments and ongoing mysteries. Despite the FBI's suspension of active investigation in 2016, developments in the Cooper case continued. The most significant recent activity centered on Richard Floyd McCoy Jr. and the evidence provided by his children in 2023. The FBI's decision to accept and examine the parachute rig, harness, and logbook discovered in the McCoy family storage represented the first major investigative action by the Bureau regarding the Cooper case in years. The fact that the FBI requested permission to exhume McCoy's body indicated serious interest in pursuing DNA comparison. If the Bureau conducted the exhumation and obtained viable DNA samples from McCoy's remains, those samples could be compared with the partial DNA profile extracted from Cooper's tie. A match would not prove conclusively that McCoy was Cooper, as the partial nature of the DNA profile and potential contamination issues might limit the reliability of any findings. However, a definitive exclusion would eliminate McCoy as a suspect, potentially resolving decades of speculation about his involvement. The McCoy children's decision to come forward after their mother's death removed a significant barrier that had prevented earlier investigation of their father's potential involvement. Their willingness to cooperate with investigators and provide family possessions for examination represented a major shift in the case dynamics. Whether their suspicions about their father will be confirmed or refuted remains to be seen, but their actions ensured that the McCoy theory received thorough examination using modern forensic techniques. Beyond the McCoy developments, researchers continued pursuing other aspects of the case using advanced technologies unavailable during earlier investigation phases. Tom Kay's diatom analysis of the Tena Bar money demonstrated how scientific approaches could yield new insights decades after evidence was initially collected. His findings about the money being wetted only briefly and several months after the hijacking fundamentally changed understanding of how the money reached Tena Bar. This breakthrough suggested that similar re-examination of other evidence might produce additional revelations. Eric Eulis, a Cooper researcher who spent more than a decade studying the case, conducted excavations at Tena Bar in 2021 and subsequent years, searching for Cooper's parachute, briefcase, or additional money. Eulis believed that evidence suggested human intervention in burying the money at Tena Bar, and that Cooper might have intentionally cached his equipment and ransom at the location, intending to retrieve it later. His excavation efforts, while not officially sanctioned by the FBI, demonstrated the ongoing dedication of amateur investigators to solving the mystery. Advanced DNA analysis techniques continued to improve, offering hope that more complete genetic profiles might be extracted from Cooper's tie or other evidence. Metagenomic DNA analysis, which can identify and characterize microbial DNA present in samples, might reveal information about where Cooper had been before the hijacking or what environments he had been exposed to. Such analysis could potentially narrow geographic regions or occupational backgrounds consistent with the hijacker's profile. The Cooper case also benefited from increased public awareness and sophisticated communication networks created by the internet and social media. Researchers could now collaborate across distances, share theories and evidence, and crowdsource analysis in ways impossible during earlier decades of the investigation. Online forums dedicated to the Cooper case hosted thousands of discussions, with participants scrutinizing every detail of the hijacking and proposing countless theories about Cooper's identity and fate. However, this democratization of investigation also created challenges. Misinformation spread easily online, with unsubstantiated claims and theories achieving wide circulation before being debunked. Some researchers became so invested in particular suspect theories that they lost objectivity, interpreting ambiguous evidence in ways that supported their preferred conclusions while dismissing contradictory information. The proliferation of competing theories sometimes obscured rather than clarified understanding of the case. Part 15. What really happened to D.B. Cooper? After more than 5 decades of investigation, speculation, and analysis, the fundamental questions about D.B. Cooper remain unanswered. Did he survive his jump from Flight 305? If he survived, how did he escape the landing zone and evade capture? If he died, why has his body never been found? What happened to the ransom money? Who was this man who pulled off what many consider the perfect crime? The survival question has divided investigators and researchers from the beginning. The FBI has maintained that Cooper probably did not survive the jump based on the dangerous conditions he faced. He jumped into darkness on a cold, rainy November night. Winds at altitude exceeded 200 miles per hour. He wore ordinary business attire, including loafers rather than boots, appropriate for a wilderness landing. He carried approximately 21 pounds of cash tied to his body. He used a parachute designed for emergency bailout rather than sport jumping, making it impossible to steer or control his descent with precision. Based on these factors, he would have landed in heavily forested mountainous terrain where even a successful landing might leave him miles from civilization in harsh conditions. However, these conclusions rest on assumptions about his preparedness and skill level that remain difficult to verify. FBI agent Larry Carr articulated the Bureau's skepticism about Cooper's survival. Diving into the wilderness without a plan, without the right equipment, in such terrible conditions, he probably never even got his chute open. Other agents agreed, suggesting Cooper's body remained somewhere in the wilderness, possibly buried under debris from the 1980 Mount St. Helens eruption, possibly tangled in tree branches high above the forest floor, possibly decomposed beyond recognition in a remote ravine. However, other FBI agents held different opinions. A senior agent anonymously told the Seattle Times in 1976, "I think he made it. I think he slept in his own bed that night. It was a clear night. A lot of the country is pretty flat. He could have just walked out, right down the road." This agent noted that law enforcement was not actively searching the area on the night of November 24, 1971, because they initially focused their efforts on the wrong location. Cooper could have landed, walked to a road, and departed the area before authorities even began looking for him. The fact that 5 men successfully completed copycat hijackings using Cooper's method and all 5 survived their jumps argued against the assumption that the jump was necessarily fatal. These copycat hijackers, most with less preparation than Cooper appeared to have made, managed to parachute from aircraft and land safely. If they survived, why couldn't Cooper have done the same? The discovery of $5,800 at Tena Bar provided the only confirmed physical evidence of what happened after Cooper jumped, but this evidence raised more questions than it answered. The location of the money far from the calculated drop zone suggested either that the FBI's flight path analysis was wrong, or that the money traveled to Tena Bar through means other than being carried by Cooper when he landed. The diatom analysis, showing that the money was wetted months after the hijacking for only a brief period, indicated deliberate human intervention rather than natural processes. Several scenarios could explain the Tena Bar discovery, though none can be proven with available evidence. Perhaps Cooper survived his jump, landed safely, cached his equipment and most of his money, and later moved a portion of it to Tena Bar for unknown reasons. Perhaps Cooper died in the landing or shortly after, and someone else discovered his body and possessions, moving some of the money to Tena Bar to throw off investigators. Perhaps Cooper had accomplices on the ground who retrieved him after the jump, and they later planted money at Tena Bar to mislead the FBI. Perhaps the FBI's entire understanding of the flight path was wrong, and Cooper actually jumped in a completely different location, possibly near or at Tena Bar itself. Each theory has proponents among researchers, but the physical evidence allows multiple interpretations. The absence of any ransom bills entering circulation remains one of the most puzzling aspects of the case. If Cooper survived with $194,200 in cash, the question of why he never spent any of it requires explanation. The serial numbers were widely publicized, making it difficult to spend the bills without risk of detection. However, Cooper could have slowly spent the money in small amounts at locations unlikely to check serial numbers against published lists. He could have laundered the money through various means. He could have left the country and spent the money in jurisdictions where the serial numbers were not monitored. The complete absence of detected spending suggests either that Cooper died without accessing the money, that he possessed extraordinary discipline in never spending any of it, or that he spent it in ways that successfully avoided all detection mechanisms. Without additional evidence, determining which explanation is most likely remains speculative. The question of Cooper's identity has consumed investigators for decades. Was he Richard Floyd McCoy Jr., who possessed all the necessary skills and executed a nearly identical crime months later? Was he Robert Rackstraw, the shadowy figure with military background and alleged intelligence connections? Was he Kenneth Christiansen, the Northwest Orient employee with inside knowledge and apparent financial motives? Was he one of the hundreds of other suspects investigated over the years? Or was he someone who never appeared on investigators' radar, a person with no criminal record, no connections to known suspects, and no reason to attract attention? The most likely explanation, based on the available evidence, may be the simplest. D.B. Cooper was probably an experienced paratrooper with military background who planned carefully, executed his crime with minimal violence, and either died in the landing or successfully escaped and disappeared. If he died, his remains likely lie somewhere in the Pacific Northwest wilderness, possibly in a location that has never been searched or in a spot rendered inaccessible by natural processes. If he survived, he would have needed remarkable restraint in never spending the marked money, never confiding in anyone who would report him, and never doing anything else to attract law enforcement attention. The evidence allows both possibilities, making definitive conclusions impossible. The romanticism surrounding Cooper and his legend tends to obscure an important reality. What he did was a serious crime that put dozens of lives at risk. The passengers and crew of Flight 305 were held hostage for hours, experiencing fear and uncertainty. The flight crew was forced to participate in a dangerous situation that could have ended in disaster. The risk that Cooper's bomb might detonate, that he might become violent, or that the aircraft might crash was real and terrifying for those aboard. The fact that no one was physically harmed represents good fortune rather than any inherent safety in Cooper's plan. Conclusion: an enduring American mystery. The D.B. Cooper hijacking occupies a unique place in American history, criminal investigation, and popular culture. It remains the only unsolved case of commercial air piracy in United States history, a distinction that grows more remarkable with each passing year. Modern aviation security, forensic capabilities, and investigative resources make it virtually impossible to imagine a similar crime succeeding today. Cooper's escape represents a moment frozen in time, a brief window when such an audacious act seemed possible. The case has inspired thousands of people to become amateur investigators, each believing they might succeed where the FBI failed. It has generated dozens of books, multiple documentaries, and countless articles and discussions. It has influenced popular culture through references in television shows, films, and novels. The mystery has survived for more than 5 decades, not because it lacks possible solutions, but because it has too many solutions, none conclusive. Every suspect presents compelling circumstantial evidence, yet also faces significant problems that prevent definitive identification. Every theory about what happened explains some aspects of the case while leaving other questions unanswered. The ambiguity inherent in the evidence allows for multiple interpretations, ensuring that debate continues and new theories emerge even as time passes, and the likelihood of solving the case diminishes. For the families of suspects, particularly those who believed their relatives might have been Cooper, the mystery has created complicated legacies. The McCoy children's decision to come forward decades after their father's death demonstrates the burden of uncertainty and the desire for truth, even when that truth might confirm unsettling suspicions. For every identified suspect, there are family members who have lived with speculation, accusation, or doubt about their loved one's possible involvement in one of America's most famous crimes. The investigation taught important lessons about the limitations of forensic technology, the challenges of solving crimes in the absence of physical evidence, and the difficulty of conducting manhunts in vast wilderness areas. It demonstrated how criminal investigations must adapt as technology evolves, with DNA analysis, diatom studies, and other techniques developed long after the crime providing new avenues for examination. The case showed that sometimes, despite exhaustive efforts and the dedication of skilled investigators, mysteries remain mysteries. As of 2024, D.B. Cooper's true identity remains unknown. Whether he survived his jump into the November darkness or perished in the wilderness below, whether he escaped with the money or lost it in the landing, whether he lived quietly for decades afterward or died within hours of his jump, we may never know. The man who became D.B. Cooper through a reporter's error has achieved a kind of immortality, not through any particular virtue or achievement, but through the simple fact that he disappeared so completely that more than 50 years of investigation could not find him. The ransom money still lies somewhere, at least the $194,200 not recovered at Tena Bar. Perhaps it remains cached in a forgotten location, slowly deteriorating with each passing year. Perhaps it was buried with Cooper's body, a fortune that will never enrich anyone. Perhaps it sits in a safe somewhere, hoarded by a man who valued the money less than the secret of what he had done. The Boeing 727 that was Northwest Orient Flight 305, tail, number N467 US, continued flying for decades after the hijacking, eventually being retired and scrapped. The aircraft that witnessed one of aviation's greatest mysteries no longer exists, just as the era it represented has passed into history. The FBI's case file on D.B. Cooper contains thousands of pages of interviews, analyses, theories, and dead ends. It represents one of the most thorough investigations ever conducted, yet it concluded without a definitive answer. The evidence carefully preserved at FBI headquarters awaits the unlikely discovery of new physical evidence that might finally solve the case. The composite sketches that became icons of criminal investigation stare out from FBI archives, depicting a face that belonged to someone real, but whose identity remains stubbornly hidden. November 24, 1971, Thanksgiving Eve, began as an ordinary day. By evening, it had become the day that D.B. Cooper jumped from a Boeing 727 and vanished into American legend. More than half a century later, that legend endures, kept alive by researchers who refuse to let the mystery die, by new technologies that offer hope of fresh insights, by the simple human desire to solve puzzles and answer questions. Whether D.B. Cooper will ever be definitively identified remains unknown. What is certain is that as long as the mystery persists, people will continue searching for answers, driven by the tantalizing possibility that one more piece of evidence, one more analysis, one more suspect might finally reveal the truth about the man who pulled off the perfect crime and then disappeared forever. Thank you for watching this comprehensive examination of the D.B. Cooper hijacking. If you're fascinated by historical mysteries and forgotten tragedies, please subscribe to Lore 2 Mystery for more deep dive investigations into America's most intriguing unsolved cases. Leave a comment below sharing your theories about what really happened to D.B. Cooper. Did he survive? Which suspect seems most credible to you? And make sure to check out our other videos exploring cold cases that continue to captivate investigators and amateur sleuths alike. Until next time, keep questioning, keep investigating, and never stop seeking the truth behind history's greatest mysteries.